Before you think about changing your life in 2026, ask yourself one quiet, uncomfortable question. Are you actually growing, or are you simply getting older? Because time is impartial. It doesn't reward intention, potential, or good ideas. It only responds to what you practice consistently, especially when no one is watching. Many people enter a new year with plans, lists, and motivation, and yet, months later, nothing fundamental has shifted. The same reactions, the same exhaustion, the same inner instability. The problem is not a lack of effort. The problem is the absence of a single, anchoring discipline. Most people scatter their energy. They start many things, abandon them quickly, and chase what looks impressive rather than what builds inner strength. Stoic philosophy warns against this. Scattered effort creates the illusion of movement while keeping you exactly where you are. Growth, real growth, comes from choosing one practice and staying with it long enough for it to change how you think, how you respond, and how you carry yourself under pressure. This video is not about becoming louder, tougher, or more dominant than others. It's about becoming internally unshakable. The kind of strength that doesn't need validation. The kind of calm that isn't threatened by chaos. In Stoic terms, this is the difference between living reactively and living deliberately. One habit, practiced daily, can quietly restructure your character. 6 months from now, people won't ask what happened to you. They'll simply notice that you no longer explain yourself, chase approval, or collapse under stress. In the next moments, I'll walk you through 10 disciplines, often called hobbies, but better understood as Stoic practices. Each one addresses a specific weakness most people never confront. You don't need all 10. You only need one. Stay with me until the end. Choose the one that corrects your deepest imbalance, and let it work in silence. Now, let's begin. Practice 1. Boxing. Stoic discipline for pressure, presence, and self-control. The first weakness most people never train is this. They give up internally long before they are actually defeated. You see it when pressure rises, when a conversation becomes uncomfortable, when fatigue sets in, when things stop going smoothly. The body is still capable, but the mind quietly exits. This is where boxing becomes a Stoic practice, not as violence, not as aggression, but as training for presence under stress. In boxing, you cannot drift. You cannot disappear into your thoughts. The moment your attention breaks, you are exposed. Every round demands full presence, breath, timing, posture, restraint. This mirrors life far more accurately than comfort ever will. Pressure arrives suddenly. Discomfort doesn't ask permission. And most people panic not because the situation is impossible, but because they never trained themselves to stay calm while being challenged. Without this kind of discipline, the cost is subtle but severe. You begin to avoid difficulty. You delay hard conversations. You retreat when resistance appears. Over time, this conditions the mind to associate discomfort with danger. The result is not peace, but fragility. Stoic philosophy warns against this. As Epictetus taught, it is not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them. Boxing exposes those judgments immediately. It shows you, in real time, how quickly the mind invents fear and how unnecessary that fear often is. The Stoic value of boxing lies in controlled hardship. You step into difficulty willingly. You learn to breathe while tired. You learn to stay composed while under pressure. You learn that intensity does not require chaos. Over time, this rewires your response to life itself. Stress no longer feels like a threat. It becomes a signal to slow down, observe, and respond deliberately. This practice is not about fighting others. It is about confronting the version of yourself that quits early, panics unnecessarily, or seeks escape instead of composure. And here is the Stoic warning. This is not about ego. Boxing loses its value the moment it becomes about domination or proving strength. The goal is restraint, not aggression. If you choose this practice, choose it quietly. Let it teach you how to remain centered when pressure arrives. Because in life, as in the ring, the person who stays present always has the advantage. Practice 2. Journaling. Stoic discipline for clarity, self-honesty, and emotional control. Most people believe their problem is a lack of confidence, discipline, or motivation. In reality, their deeper weakness is far more subtle. They rarely confront their own thoughts honestly. The mind becomes crowded with assumptions, justifications, and emotional reactions that go unexamined. Journaling, in the Stoic sense, is not self-expression. It is self-examination. When thoughts remain unspoken, they feel true simply because they repeat themselves. Writing disrupts that loop. It forces precision. You can no longer hide behind vague feelings or blurred narratives. As Marcus Aurelius practiced in his meditations, putting thoughts into words exposes their structure and often their weakness. What once felt overwhelming on the inside appears smaller and more manageable on the page. Without this practice, the cost accumulates quietly. You react before you understand. You argue from emotion rather than reason. You replay conversations long after they end. Over time, this creates mental fatigue and impulsive behavior. Stoicism teaches that inner chaos is not caused by the world, but by unexamined judgments. Journaling makes those judgments visible. The Stoic value of journaling lies in its ability to separate perception from reality. You begin to notice patterns, the same fears repeating, the same triggers resurfacing, the same excuses returning in new forms. Writing gives you distance from these patterns. It turns emotional reactions into objects of observation rather than forces of control. This distance is where freedom begins. A simple Stoic practice is enough. At the end of the day, write what disturbed you, why it disturbed you, and whether it was within your control. Then write what you could do differently next time. This is not about blame or positivity. It is about accuracy. Clarity precedes discipline. Here is the Stoic warning. Journaling loses its power if it becomes rumination. The goal is not to dwell on emotion, but to refine judgment. Write briefly, write honestly, then close the page and move forward. If you choose this practice, commit to it in silence. No one needs to read it. No one needs to validate it. Over time, you will notice something change. Your reactions slow down, your decisions sharpen, and your inner world becomes quieter. And a quiet mind, as the Stoics knew well, is a resilient one. Practice 3. Weightlifting. Stoic discipline for consistency, humility, and long-term strength. One of the most common illusions people live with is the belief that strength should arrive quickly. When results take time, enthusiasm fades. When progress slows, effort becomes negotiable. Weightlifting dismantles this illusion with brutal honesty. The iron does not respond to intention, mood, or confidence. It responds only to consistent, repeated effort. This is why weightlifting aligns so precisely with Stoic discipline. In the beginning, the weight feels heavier than expected. Progress is slow. Some days, nothing moves the way you want it to. This mirrors life exactly. The Stoics warned against tying our sense of worth to immediate outcomes. Strength, whether physical or internal, is earned through patient repetition, not dramatic bursts of motivation. Every session teaches the same lesson. Showing up matters more than feeling ready. Without this kind of practice, the cost shows up everywhere. People become addicted to novelty. They chase shortcuts. They abandon commitments when results stop being visible. Over time, this erodes self-trust. You stop believing your own promises because experience has taught you that you won't keep them. Weightlifting quietly repairs that relationship with yourself. Each completed set is a small act of integrity. The Stoic value here is not aesthetics or comparison. It is humility. The weights remind you that progress is incremental, that limits are real, and that patience is not weakness. As Epictetus taught, freedom begins when we stop demanding that reality move at our preferred speed. The iron teaches you to respect time rather than argue with it. There is, however, a Stoic warning. This practice loses its meaning the moment it becomes about ego, validation, or proving superiority. The goal is not to impress. The goal is to build the capacity to endure effort without resentment. Lift to train your character, not your image. Before we move on, pause for a moment. If you have practiced boxing, journaling, or weightlifting, even briefly share it in the comments. Not to boast, but to mark a commitment you are willing to keep quietly. And if you haven't started yet, notice which of these three speaks to your current weakness. Stay with me. The next practice shifts the focus from external resistance to something even more demanding. Learning to master your own body without relying on anything else. Practice 4. Calisthenics. Stoic discipline for self-mastery, control, and quiet confidence. Many people believe they lack strength, when what they truly lack is control over themselves. They rely on tools, environments, and external conditions to perform at their best. When those supports disappear, so does their confidence. Calisthenics confronts this weakness directly. It strips training down to its most honest form. Your body, gravity, and your willingness to remain disciplined without assistance. In calisthenics, there are no machines to stabilize you and no shortcuts to mask imbalance. A pull-up reveals your relationship with effort. A plank exposes your tolerance for discomfort. A handstand shows whether your mind stays calm when your body feels unfamiliar. Each movement requires awareness, patience, and respect for limits, qualities the Stoics valued deeply. You cannot rush mastery here. You must earn it through repetition and restraint. Without this practice, dependency grows quietly. People begin to believe they can only perform under ideal conditions. They hesitate when resources are limited. Over time, this creates a subtle fragility. Stoic philosophy teaches that freedom comes from reducing unnecessary dependence. When you can control your own body, even in simple ways, your confidence becomes portable. It no longer relies on equipment, approval, or perfect circumstances. The Stoic power of calisthenics lies in internal alignment. Every movement demands that breath, focus, and posture work together. When they don't, progress stops. This teaches a crucial lesson. Force without control leads nowhere. Calm, consistent effort is what creates strength. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Calisthenics reinforces this mindset by anchoring you fully in the present repetition. There is also a warning. Calisthenics is not about chasing impressive tricks or public recognition. The moment the practice becomes performative, it loses its Stoic value. The aim is not to impress others, but to cultivate quiet confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you can rely on yourself. This practice prepares you for the next challenge on the Stoic path. Once you begin to master your body, a deeper question arises. Can you also master your impulses, your timing, and your decisions? That is where the next discipline leads. Practice 5. Chess. Stoic discipline for strategic calm, patience, and deliberate action. Many people believe their biggest problem is a lack of intelligence or opportunity. In truth, their real weakness is impatience. They react too quickly, speak too soon, and act before understanding the full situation. Chess confronts this tendency with absolute clarity. It is a silent environment where impulsive behavior is punished immediately, and calm, deliberate thinking is quietly rewarded. In chess, every move carries consequences that cannot be undone. You are forced to slow down, observe patterns, and think several steps ahead. There is no room for emotional relief moves, those choices made simply to feel better in the moment. This mirrors life precisely. Most mistakes are not caused by ignorance, but by urgency. The Stoics understood this well. They trained themselves to pause before responding, knowing that delay is often the most powerful action available. Without this discipline, the cost accumulates silently. People become reactive. They defend positions that don't serve them. They escalate conflicts that require patience, not force. Over time, this erodes judgment. Stoicism teaches that events themselves are neutral. It is our response that creates harm or stability. Chess turns this philosophy into practice. Each game reveals how emotion distorts reasoning and how restraint restores it. The Stoic value of chess lies in mental composure under pressure. You learn to sit with uncertainty without rushing to resolve it. You learn to accept losses without self-judgment and victories without arrogance. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, the task is not to win every moment, but to act in accordance with reason. Chess conditions the mind to choose clarity over impulse. There is a Stoic warning here. Chess loses its value if it becomes an obsession with domination or ego. The goal is not to crush an opponent, but to refine your decision-making process. Each game is a mirror, reflecting how you think when time, pressure, and consequences intersect. This practice sharpens your inner timing. And once timing improves, another challenge becomes unavoidable: learning how and when to speak. That is the focus of the next Stoic discipline. Practice 6. Communication. Stoic discipline for clarity, boundaries, and quiet authority. Many people struggle not because they lack ideas, but because they cannot express themselves without tension. They either stay silent when they should speak, or they speak too much in an effort to defend, justify, or prove themselves. Communication, practiced through a Stoic lens, is not about persuasion or charisma. It is about clarity, restraint, and self-respect. In Stoic philosophy, words are an extension of judgment. When judgment is unstable, speech becomes reactive. Conversations turn emotional. Boundaries blur. Practicing communication means learning to say exactly what is necessary, no more, no less, without anger, fear, or apology. This requires discipline. It requires the courage to pause before responding and the humility to accept that not every thought deserves expression. Without this practice, the cost is familiar. People replay conversations in their minds, wishing they had spoken differently. They over-explain themselves to seek approval. They escalate conflict by responding to tone rather than substance. Over time, this erodes inner authority. The Stoics warned that when speech is uncontrolled, it becomes a source of self-betrayal. Silence, when chosen deliberately, is often stronger than unnecessary words. The Stoic value of communication lies in deliberate expression. You learn to speak from principle rather than emotion. You learn to state boundaries calmly, without hostility. This does not make you passive. It makes you precise. As Epictetus taught, it is better to be silent and thought-wise than to speak and remove all doubt. Controlled speech reflects a controlled mind. There is also a warning. Communication loses its Stoic power when it becomes performative, when the goal shifts from clarity to influence or validation. Speaking well is not about being impressive. It is about being aligned with truth. When your words match your values, confidence follows naturally. As this practice matures, something important changes. You no longer feel compelled to fill silence, defend every position, or win every exchange. And once your speech becomes measured, a deeper hunger often appears, the desire to refine your thinking itself. That is where the next discipline begins. Practice 7. Reading. Stoic discipline for perspective, judgment, and long-term wisdom. Most people don't realize how much time they lose learning the same lessons the hard way. They repeat mistakes, endure unnecessary suffering, and call it experience. Stoic philosophy never admired this kind of learning. Wisdom, to the Stoics, meant knowing when pain is avoidable. Reading is the discipline that allows you to borrow clarity instead of paying for it with years of regret. Only later do most people notice the cost of not reading. Their thinking becomes narrow, their reactions predictable. They respond to problems as if they are new, when in fact they are ancient. Power struggles, fear of loss, anger, impatience. These patterns have been examined for thousands of years. Without exposure to deeper thought, the mind begins to mistake familiarity for truth. Reading interrupts this cycle. It introduces you to perspectives that challenge your instincts. One book can compress decades of insight into a few hours of attention. As Marcus Aurelius did through constant study and reflection, reading trains the mind to step outside immediate emotion and view situations from a wider angle. This shift alone can prevent countless impulsive decisions. The Stoic value of reading is not consumption, but calibration. It realigns judgment. When faced with difficulty, the mind naturally reaches for what it has been fed. If it has been fed only distraction, reaction follows. If it has been fed philosophy, history, and reason, response becomes measured. Reading quietly upgrades the quality of your inner dialogue. There is, however, a Stoic warning. Reading loses its power when it becomes escapism or intellectual decoration. Knowledge that never reaches action is weight without strength. The Stoics read not to feel superior, but to live better. A few pages practiced daily are more valuable than shelves of untouched books. If this practice resonates, choose it with intention. Read slowly. Reflect briefly. Apply relentlessly. Over time, you'll notice that problems feel smaller not because life is easier, but because your perspective is stronger. And once your thinking becomes clearer, another challenge inevitably arises: the ability to remain steady when discomfort persists. That is where the next discipline leads. Practice 8. Running. Stoic discipline for endurance, discomfort, and mental resilience. Most people do not break under extreme pressure. They break under prolonged discomfort. The kind that doesn't look dramatic, the kind that lingers. Fatigue, boredom, repetition. Running trains you to meet this form of difficulty without negotiation. It is not about speed, distance, or performance. It is about learning to remain steady when the body asks for relief and the mind searches for excuses. In running, discomfort arrives predictably. The breath shortens. The legs feel heavy. The voice in your head begins to bargain. This moment is the practice. There is no opponent to blame and no shortcut to take. You either slow down consciously or quit impulsively. The Stoics understood this training well. They believed that endurance, not intensity, determines character. Running turns that belief into physical reality. Without this discipline, tolerance for discomfort shrinks. People avoid effort that feels unpleasant, even when it is necessary. They abandon projects, conversations, and commitments not because they are impossible, but because they are uncomfortable. Over time, this creates fragility. Stoic philosophy teaches that discomfort is not harm. It is information. Running teaches the body and mind to receive that information without panic. The Stoic value of running lies in learning to stay present while conditions are imperfect. You discover that you can breathe through strain. You can maintain rhythm without enthusiasm. You can finish without drama. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, if it is endurable, then endure it. Running transforms this statement from an idea into a lived experience. There is also a warning. Running loses its Stoic value when it becomes an escape or a competition of ego. The goal is not to outrun others or punish the body. The goal is to develop trust in your ability to continue without complaint. Progress here is quiet and internal. As this practice settles, something shifts. You no longer rush to escape discomfort. You stay. You finish. And once endurance becomes familiar, a deeper form of freedom becomes possible, the freedom that comes from not depending on permission, circumstances, or comfort. That is where the next discipline begins. Practice 9. High-income skill. Stoic discipline for independence, leverage, and quiet freedom. A common mistake many people make is believing that freedom comes from waiting for the right boss, the right opportunity, the right moment to be chosen. Years pass this way, competent, capable, but dependent. Stoic philosophy has little patience for this illusion. Freedom, to a Stoic, is built, not granted. Only after dependence becomes painful do most people begin to question it. They realize their time is limited by permission, their income tied to moods they don't control, their stability vulnerable to decisions made elsewhere. This is where the discipline of learning a high-income skill enters, not as a pursuit of wealth, but as a practice of self-reliance. The Stoic value here is leverage without noise. Skills like writing, design, sales, or problem-solving translate effort directly into value. They reduce reliance on status, location, or hierarchy. When you can produce something others need, you are less easily pressured, rushed, or manipulated. As the Stoics taught, the person who needs little is difficult to control. Skill reduces need. Without this practice, the cost is subtle but persistent. You hesitate to speak honestly. You tolerate misalignment. You delay decisions because the consequences feel too risky. Over time, this erodes self-respect. Stoicism does not condemn work or money, but it rejects dependency. Independence is a moral position, not a financial one. There is a warning, however. High-income skills lose their Stoic value when they become driven by greed or comparison. The goal is not accumulation, but optionality, not excess, but sufficiency. Skill should simplify life, not consume it. Learn one thing deeply. Apply it consistently. Let it support your autonomy rather than define your worth. If this practice resonates, notice what it gives you immediately, not wealth, but steadiness. Decisions feel less urgent. Boundaries feel easier to hold. And once independence begins to take shape, another realization follows. The way you think and communicate can now reach beyond your immediate circle. That leads directly to the final discipline. Practice 10. Content creation. Stoic discipline for clarity of thought, influence, and meaningful expression. Many people believe content creation is about visibility, being seen, heard, or recognized. From a Stoic perspective, this is a misunderstanding. The true value of creating content is not attention, but clarification. When you attempt to explain an idea clearly to others, you are forced to understand it clearly yourself. This is why content creation, practiced correctly, becomes a discipline of thought rather than performance. Before people begin creating, they often underestimate how vague their thinking is. Opinions feel solid until they must be articulated. Beliefs seem clear until they are tested by explanation. Content creation exposes these gaps. Writing, speaking, or teaching turns intuition into structure. It demands order, coherence, and restraint. The Stoics believed that clarity of judgment is the foundation of a stable life. Creation refines that judgment. Without this practice, ideas remain internal and unchallenged. The mind cycles through the same conclusions without refining them. Over time, this leads to stagnation, disguised as reflection. Stoic philosophy warns against this inward collapse. Thought must be exercised, not merely entertained. Creation gives thought resistance, and resistance strengthens it. The Stoic value of content creation lies in disciplined expression. You learn to say what matters without excess. You learn to communicate principles rather than emotions. Over time, your voice becomes calmer, your arguments cleaner, and your presence more grounded. Influence, when it appears, is a byproduct, not the aim. As Epictetus taught, the task is not to appear wise, but to live wisely. There is also a warning. Content creation loses its Stoic alignment when it becomes driven by validation, metrics, or comparison. When numbers replace principles, clarity dissolves. The practice must remain private in intention, even if public in form. Create to refine yourself first. If you commit to this discipline, something subtle but profound occurs. Your thinking sharpens. Your values stabilize. And you realize that influence does not come from volume, but from consistency and truth. With that realization, the path comes full circle, because the strongest life is the one that no longer needs to announce itself. As we close, return to the question that opened this journey. What truly separates the 1% from everyone else? It is not talent. It is not intelligence. It is not access, luck, or intensity. The difference is far quieter and far more demanding. The 1% choose one discipline, stay with it long enough for it to reshape their character, and continue even when no one is watching. Most people look for transformation that can be seen. The Stoic path looks for transformation that can be felt, the kind that changes how you respond to stress, how you hold silence, how you act when motivation fades. Each practice you've heard today points to the same truth. Progress does not come from doing more, but from doing less, more consistently. Growth accelerates the moment you stop scattering your effort. Stoicism never promised a dramatic life. It promised a stable one. The practices we explored are not shortcuts or hacks. They are disciplines that remove dependence, sharpen judgment, and reduce unnecessary suffering. Over time, they do something subtle but profound. They make you harder to disturb, less reactive, and more grounded. And that is a form of power few people ever develop. Here is the Stoic line to carry forward, not as a slogan, but as a reminder. You don't become the 1% by intensity. You become it by quiet consistency. Before you leave, take a moment of honest reflection. You don't need to explain your choice. You don't need to justify it. Simply acknowledge it. In the comments, complete this sentence. The one practice I commit to without applause is, if this path resonates with you, you're welcome to stay. Like the video if it helped clarify something. Share it with someone who is tired of noise and ready for steadiness. And subscribe to Stoic Path if you want to keep walking this quieter, stronger road together. We don't rush here. We don't compete. We practice and we return.